Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the La Chirimoya wash processed Peru from the Picky Chemist. And there's the bag right there. And the Picky Chemist, based out of Chaudfontaine, Belgium. And there are coffee roasters that's appeared on this channel a number of times this year already, including our recent review of the Gesha Village Lot 24118, a natural processed Ethiopian coffee. And when picking out these coffees from the Picky Chemist, this one did catch my interest largely because we have reviewed a number of Peruvian geshas this year up to this point already. And it was definitely going to be interesting to compare and contrast their Peruvian gesha with a number of other ones that we've reviewed this year. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how this one turned out, as this right here is day 63. And recipe we went with for this coffee was the Picky Chemist recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, yes I did, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. And we also went a little bit more fine on the grind with this one, but not quite as much as we did with that Gesha Village coffee. Now, roast profile for this coffee, this one is another one that they do have listed as one of their ultralight offerings, and we're going to continue to pick out every single one of their ultralight offerings as long as they are offering it in the ultralight version, as that does seem to be the most popular profile of this coffee roaster, which a lot of people do enjoy because it is some of the lightest roasted coffees out there, and for that reason we can say that this one is on the extremely light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 30, first impression through the V60, and the coffee was off to a surprisingly herbal start, to the point to where it was extremely dominant within the presentation of the coffee itself. While there were some slight floral sweetness to it, it's not to the extent that was expected for a Peruvian gesha, nor the clarity either, as there was plenty of lemon brightness, but overall it was an okay first impression. And it is worth noting that after this first impression, I did have a quick conversation with Airworks, who said that they actually had the complete opposite first impression of this coffee, where it was wonderfully floral for them. So I felt like maybe with some adjustments, maybe some time, we were able to get that similar experience. Though it's also worth noting that shortly after that, the next time they tried this coffee, they got a much more similar experience to what we had, where it was a fair bit more herbal and kind of off than they might have expected for a first try. Day 33 through the Chemist, and there was a similar second impression, as the coffee still isn't overly sweet, and I feel like a lot of the other Peruvian geshas set the bar extremely high for these Peruvian geshas to be just extremely sweet coffees, especially in that bubblegum-like sense, which has been pretty consistent with a lot of the ones that we've reviewed. It's a little less herbal this time around, which does seem to help. It opens up a little bit more on the cool down with a greater emphasis on some of the sweeter floral aspects to it, so getting a little bit more florality this time around. Bright citric qualities while leaving still a little bit of that lasting herbal finish this time around as well. Day 36 through the UFO brewer, and the coffee was the best it had been to this point, as it has a little less of that herbal quality. And as of this moment, the herbality of this one just seemed to be so dominant to the extent where I wasn't able to pull out a lot of the other differentiating qualities to this one. Outside of that, though, there was a bit more prominent of a graininess as well, as the best of this coffee comes on the back end with a sweetness that does open up in a sweeter floral sense, with a little bit more of that kind of coffee blossom-like feel. And I think one of the descriptors they have is something along the lines of an orange blossom. But for me, a lot of coffees I've had in the past that have that specific note, coffee blossom, I could see based off the experiences we'd had up to this point. Day 39. Through the V60 with the Picky Chemist recipe, and the coffee is a little better, as there's still a bit more intensity, but not quite as sweet as anticipated, as there's a bit more floral and herbal aspects to it this time around, with an abundance of the citric brightness as well. Plenty of body with a very long-lasting finish to it, and I still feel like I hadn't necessarily gotten the best of this coffee, because I'll be honest, I've heard mixed things as of this moment. I had heard some people say that this coffee was truly outstanding, and I'd also heard some people say that they were really struggling with this coffee as well. And I felt like we were neither, honestly. It wasn't truly outstanding, and at the same time, I think that we were starting to see progression. But at the same time, just a lot of the feedback that I had heard as of this moment seemed to be one of two directions. And then day 42 through the Chemex with the Picky Chemist recipe, and the coffee was actually the best it had been to this point, which also makes me laugh. Though it's a little bit more tame, as it's relatively lacking in the overall sweetness for a Peruvian gesha once again. However, the majority of it does come in the cool down and finish, as the forefront continues to remain a bit more floral and tea-like with a prominent citric quality in line with the listed lemon, and I was definitely getting plenty of lemon throughout the entirety of this one. Day 45 through the V60 with the Picky Chemist recipe and a bit more fine of a grind, and it definitely did seem to help the overall intensity as it had significantly more sweetness this time around, as it's a bit more in line with the listed Orange Blossom, offering a combination of tea-like and citric qualities, but also a bit more of a honeysuckle-like component now, significantly better. And I feel like this is a good point to highlight that with these last two coffees that we were reviewing from the Picky Chemist, I noticed that we did seem to need to go a bit more fine on the grind than previously with some of our other reviews from the Picky Chemist in the past. And I think that's just kind of our big takeaway this cycle around from the Picky Chemist coffees that we did have. I mentioned in our previous set of 3, which included a Mejorado coffee, that I had great results with all 3 of those coffees. I didn't need to tinker with them too much. They all seemed to turn out very nice regardless of the adjustments we made, but these did feel like a little bit more work to get them to the point where I was really looking for them to be. Day 48 through the Chemex with these same adjustments, and the coffee was the best that I've been to this point as well, so just going a little bit more fine in that grind definitely did seem to help, as this time it was a bit more reminiscent of the La Lima in terms of the overall florality and intensity. I think that's what Airworks was probably mentioning from the first time that they did try it, as I could definitely see an abundance of those floral qualities and a bit more intensity. It still wasn't quite as sweet as some of the other iterations of Peruvian geshas that we've had, but even then it's been better overall, as there's a stronger florality in the cool down with a much more prominent jasmine, and I can say that this is the first time I felt that was a very abundant quality within this coffee. Day 51. Through the V60 final notes we have same adjustments, and it has really highlighted a lot of the citric brightness, as the lemon quality is the highest that had been to this point, and it's a bit of a trade-off to the previously more prominent floral qualities to it, so I'm gonna laugh at that. The best experience I had was at the day 48 mark with the Chemex, funny enough. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel and the Picky Chemist's tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And as I just mentioned, we also have the Picky Chemist's tasting wheel pulled up so I can kind of compare them side by side. And this is always a really fun part of our reviews of the Picky Chemist. Let's see how we did. We'll start with the cleanliness level 4. First impression I had of this coffee was just so herbal that I felt like it took away from the overall cleanliness. But towards the end, especially given the wonderful definition to the floral and citric profiles of this coffee, cleanliness was always going to reach that level 4 mark. I think maybe if there wasn't such a strong herbality, it possibly could have gotten a little higher. Maybe there was a bit more definition to it, as I know we've scored at least a couple of Peruvian geshas at that level 5 cleanliness in the past, but I think that was just a slightly hindering quality to this coffee. So level 4 where we opted to put it, and unsurprisingly, they have the fermentiness toned down all the way to the very minimum, level 1. So I kind of expected that that's where they would have gone. I wonder how they would have scored it if they would have had the same methodology that we did, where it was cleanliness as opposed to fermentiness. Regardless, I would say pretty similar in that sense. Finish level 4. I know that's one thing that they don't highlight on their tasting wheel, but the finish of this coffee was very pretty, especially in terms of that floral sense and a lot of these citric qualities. Later day, last day, we did have that citric quality, that lemon quality was very abundant. So for that reason, level 4, very fitting for that. Sweetness level 4, and they have the level 4 on there too. They have it higher than what they had for the Gesha Village coffee, and I can see that on certain days, especially some of the Chemex days, because I did get a lot of sweeter qualities from the coffee on those days specifically. And for that reason, I can see it being a little bit more intense in the sweetness than the Gesha Village coffees were, because I feel like that one peaked just barely at that level 4 mark, where this one reached a little bit above that in the way that they have it presented in their tasting wheel. Acidity level 4, and they have it just below the level 4, somewhere between a 3 and a 4. But I was getting enough citric brightness to this coffee that justified it being that high, as I felt like it was on par with some of the Kenyan coffees we'd actually had from them as well. So level 4 where we opted to put that. Let's go ahead and move on to the florality. We opted for level 4, and so did the Picky Chemist. I don't think that's really surprising. Towards the end of this one, the floral qualities were the most abundant, and definitely one of the more consistent qualities. Even on some of the earlier days when there was a lot of herbal qualities, there was still plenty of florality to it, if maybe not necessarily the best defined, which is something that came up a fair bit later within this coffee. Citrus fruit, level 4, and let's see where they put it. Citrus fruit, oh, they have it pretty low. They have it somewhere between the 2 and the 3, so we disagree on that. I got a lot of lemon, enough to the point where it justified the brightness being as high as it did, and this tasting wheel was made on the final day, where it seemed to just be a little bit more bright and a little bit more citric forward than it had been on some of the other days. So I could probably see it most of the time being in a level 3, which is closer to what they got, but as far as it goes, when we made this tasting wheel, level 4 was definitely much more valid for us. And then looks like one more thing worth discussing. We have the body there at level 3, and they have the texture level 3. Okay, so we see eye to eye on that one as well. A little bit more medium bodied in general. Kind of surprising to me. Both of these are gesha coffees. I can see it a little bit more with the natural, but this one being a washed Peruvian gesha, though, as I kind of think about it, they have fluctuated a little bit more than your Panamanian geshas or even your Ethiopian geshas, your washed Panamanian and Ethiopian geshas. So level 3 does seem like a good place for that. Outside of that, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what we were getting for this coffee. A little different from the Piggy Chemist, but still closer than what we got for the Kenyan comparisons. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. The peaks of this one are actually very nice, and I could see it being a fair bit reminiscent of some of the best that we've had from the H&S La Lima coffee, which as of this moment is still my favorite Peruvian gesha that we've reviewed this year. And the main reason for that is because I did get a little bit more clarity and a little bit more sweetness from that coffee. And I think that this one offered something a little bit different. I think it was a little bit more bright, and I think the florals were a little bit more unique, and it had just a little bit different of that, we'll say, herbal feel that made these two coffees similar but different in a lot of ways as well. And I can see that appealing to some people that may look for those specific characteristics of a coffee more so than what I look for. The H&S La Lima was a much better representation of exactly what I'm looking for in that type of coffee. It was very high on the florality, the sweetness, the cleanliness, and also even some of the fruit qualities that were presented within that coffee, where this one just seemed to skew a little bit more in that citric direction, one that I didn't necessarily look for too much, and then at the same time, just a little bit more of an herbal quality that I've never necessarily been the biggest fan of. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, well, we'll start in that direction. As much as I want to highlight the citric quality of it, it's still interesting to me that I don't know if a lot of people got that same experience that I did with this coffee, because if more people got a result in line with the Piggy Chemist, then it's a little bit toned down in that citric sense. But even then, the florals are definitely one of the more abundant qualities if you're able to tinker it and get it to the right spot. And as a result, it can be a very clean, a very enjoyable, sweet and floral quality. A lot of experiences that you have come to enjoy from these Peruvian geshas. And that's keeping in mind the very light profile of this coffee. Once again, the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the La Chirimoya wash process Peru from the Piggy Chemist. Thanks for watching.